All right. And welcome to another episode of And Then We Win. I have my co-host with me, Kobe Jones here. And we have a very special guest with us here today, Laura Collins. She is known as the athlete psychotherapist. She is a co-host, one half of the podcast Tenacity, and the founder of the Athlete Community Clinicians, ACC. Not to get it confused with the Athletic Coastal Conference. I hope, there's no trademark infringement on that, but we don't have to worry about that, but she's still standing, so that's a great thing. So, Laura, welcome to our show. We're happy to have you here, and we're just gonna dive right in with some questions, and then we'll go into a little bit after that. We'll go to our new segment, which is Kobe's corner three. She'll ask you 3 4 questions, and she'll dive into that she came up with, and then we'll keep the party rocking from there on out. But Laura, oh my gosh, where do we start? We begin. Thank you for being here. Let's start with that. It's a pleasure
First
to
of all,
have you
thank you so
here.
much for having me.
And so we put the bad signal out, and Laura answered, which she can't. I always find it funny when people say, "Oh, I don't think I have anything to say," or I don't have that big of a story. And I'm like, okay, I look at their bios. I start doing my research. I'm like, oh my gosh, this person is phenomenal. And so the most important thing came out to me. You started off as an elite gymnast, as you shared, and then you went to become a diver at a D1 school. That's not a transition you often see. So could you tell me a little background story behind that? How did that happen?
Yeah, the nutshell version is that it was a particular type of gymnastics of the times. It was the 80s and 90s gymnastics, which everyone sort of knows is it was the quote unquote years of the harsh coaching or the tough coaching era. There's a lot of overtraining, a lot of wear and tear on young gymnast body at the time. I think Joy, who's my co-host on Tenacity, we did all the calculations and we probably were in the gym about 46 hours a week as young gymnasts. And I'm talking like 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old. I had gone through some abusive coaching as well. And one of the stories that it comes up on Tenacity, I don't have to repeat it here, but it resulted in me having very sort of, I don't want to use the word brittle elbows, but my elbows were certainly my Achilles heel. And what happened is the type of injuries that were sustained in the joint, which we know now, or at least we would like there to be more research on the impact of sports on young children's bodies in particular. Even though there's bendy bones, these still have sort of growing bones and we have growing joints. And so when there is an injury that is done to the joints of very young athletes, it can result in abnormalities. And that's what happened to me. Basically, in the healing process of all of this, I basically had pitcher's elbow, like the cartilage kind of wore out and I kept getting these bone chips. And it resulted in, by the time I was 12, I had already had arthritis, which was wild to think. So my gymnastics career ended because I basically had an elderly body as a 12-year-old because of the overtraining that was done. So making that transition into diving was not my choice. It was not voluntary, but I was living in Texas. That's where I was doing gymnastics. And when I went back to California, my poor immigrant parents, they did not know what to do with me. They're used to this, very, very energetic, bubbly young person that's kind of all over the place is now obviously as a 12-year-old, I was a depressed 12-year-old girl sitting on the couch. And I was, 3 years of very, very intensive gymnastics. My whole world, like the kind where you are putting your school around your sport, that kind of life. To go from that to there's no sport whatsoever and it's all school. And I'm looking at these classmates who I had left, 4 years before, and everybody's changed. Now I'm like in junior high, middle school. And even though I am 13 years old and my peers are 13 years old, I very clearly look like I never left elementary school. The training to the body and the scarcity of food and hydration and that impact just kind of keeps you very small. So my parents, they call my sister, my sister who was my champion, my protector. They just said, we don't know what to do with her. We've never seen her like this and we feel at a loss. And what she did is that she spoke with the gymnast community and a lot of the gymnasts who were injured were going into diving. And so that was kind of put into my parents' mind. Yeah. So Rose Bowl Aquatic Center was built out of the funds that came out of the 84 Olympics. And it's incredible pool, amazing coaching. And it just happened to be there. So I ended up there. And if you're a gymnast, you just change which way you land and you become a very good diver. So that's what I went into. I like to say that I love gymnastics. Gymnastics was absolutely my love, but I think diving saved my life. And what I mean by that is that the structure of having a sport and to do it so well and to do that thing, I was in training 6 days a week at least. And I went from that to, again, training 6 days a week in diving. So that was really the move there. And I always did well. My heart might have not have been into it, but I had amazing coaches. I had a really fantastic team. And that in that way, I was able to just have the structure of sports, which I think was really important. And that got me a scholarship to UCLA. I cannot thank diving enough for paving the road to a great education, so many opportunities, thanks to diving.
And so I'm going to automatically assume that has become part of your why when it comes to being the athlete psychotherapist, as you call yourself. And am I right to assume that, like, that's what really got you started in your space of going to sports social work and providing mental health support for those who are athletes?
Well, that story is actually, it's very windy. When I left diving, and I left diving because the same injuries that plagued me as a gymnast then ended my career with diving. Now, granted, I was a senior at UCLA. I was probably not going to dive afterwards, but nobody ever asked, what are you going to do after you graduate? And I remember the doctor at UCLA saying, Laura, your elbows are ripped. Like they're just, let it go. All the MRIs were showing all the same type of inflammation, all kinds of stuff. He just said, like, let it go. Go live your life. And I had never, in 15 years of sports, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, travel, every vacation is actually a diving competition or a gymnastics competition. So there was no such thing as like, yeah, let me just live a normal life. I had no idea what normal was in that way. It's just another version of normal. So when I left UCLA, actually, I didn't tell people I was an athlete for many, many years. I could not face it. My identity was lost. I just lost. And so I went into the Peace Corps, I don't know. Then I went to Alaska for some time. I did a lot of traveling, just kind of picked up jobs here and there. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I realized that something that I was very passionate about was how people saw their environments. Put it this way. When I was in Bolivia, what I noticed is that the way people would treat their environments had a lot to do with their self-esteem, at least in the town that I was in. So I remember telling a friend that, and he's like, I think you'd be a really good, like a social psychologist or some kind of that. And I just thought, I don't ever want to sit and listen to people's stories all day long in a clinic. I want to be outside. I like hiking. I like being in the fresh air. But I ended up landing one day on a social work page. And it seemed to fit all the things that I wanted. It wasn't confining in any way, shape, or form. I liked the idea of being able to work in a clinic and like hear people's stories, but maybe do some admin. I had done a lot of program planning. So it kind of fed my tendency to get bored in any one thing all the time. So I go to Columbia University. That's where I went to social work school. And while I was there, I initially started with program planning. I got bored of that because I had been doing it. Tried admin. That was really boring as well. And then what I really enjoyed was human behavior and social environment. I loved those classes. I loved thinking about how did our minds come to be and think the way that they do. And I was very attached to attachment theory. It made a lot of sense to me. Object relations, ego psychology just fit. It became and continues to be probably my foundation of how I view the world in many ways. And so that was it. What I realized is I actually do love hearing people's stories. And I think in storytelling, that's where there's so much healing. There was once somebody asked me, like, what is it that I like about doing therapy in particular? And I thought, for a while it was, I like to think about how people think. But when I really do think about this piece as well, is when I was growing up as an Asian American, as an Asian American woman, as a child of immigrants, I'm first generation here as well. There was a lot of othering growing up as well. Always being the only woman of color on the team, the only. I think I'm one of the first Asian American gymnasts to win a national championship. It's like that early on. But when we tell stories, then everybody has a story. Everybody has a Vicks Vapor Rub story or the chicken soup story or the thing that their grandmothers did. And in doing that, I found that there was healing for me too. It was a way for us to be human. And so all this to say, this full circle moment came is I kind of ran away from sharing this athlete part of myself and just really focused on mental health for a long time. I loved working for the city. I worked for health and hospitals for, over 12 years, I think. And then I became a clinic director and I enjoyed doing, especially as this is where clinician training comes into play. I love helping people find their personality as a therapist and their voice as a clinician. And then I became a mom, and my kids started turning the ages where the abuse that I experienced as a young gymnast, they entered those ages. And I
Mm.
remember thinking to myself, if my kid had a coach that I had, like what I would do, how I would respond as a parent, be wildly different than what I went through. And that kind of put me on the path to healing. And that's where actually Hanasti was born. Hanasti was born because I just started talking with my cousin Joy, and we realized that, especially that type of sports mentality back then in the 80s and 90s, it was about staying silent. It was sort of a military, like a military style of sports. Like you just kind of be a soldier. Your coach is your dictator and you do as you're told. But as we started sharing stories, we realized like we had never talked about this before. Silence was
Mhm.
part of that training. And, season 1 of Hanasti was about sharing our story for the first time, not only with each other, but with our families, with teammates, with friends. And especially for my teammates, like it was really scary. They didn't want to share. Joy had a couple people that were a little bit more open about it, but mine did not. And totally understanding. I get it. But what happened is like thereafter, the stories started coming out. And not only
Mhm.
their stories, but I noticed that places that I had like holes, I couldn't remember things, somebody else could fill that in. So that's the beauty of when you have collective healing in PTSD, in particular, is that you
Mhm.
start getting your story back together as a collective. And it was so powerful. So all this to say, full circle moment is
Yeah.
the past couple of years has been when I went back to private practice. As it's part of going back into private practice was about being able to be more available to take care of our ailing parents, our elderly parents.
Mhm.
And so this was an opportunity to get to really focus on what is it that I wanted to focus on. But during the course of Anasty, so many people's stories were coming. It wasn't just gymnasts, it was football players, basketball players, tennis players, fencing, like so many sports that I didn't even, I've never spoken to anybody about that before. And to hear their stories and to hear their process of healing and be part of it was an honor, is an honor. And
Mhm.
that's what I focus on today. So, for the past couple of years, I have been focusing on, of course, mental performance is always a big thing of everybody because everybody does want to do well.
Mhm.
Everybody wants to perform well, as we should. But I do think that my brand is a little bit more on the mental healthy side. I do want people to, I think social work is incredible for sports because I believe that the way we see the world, that sort of person and environment, the system, the ecosystem, the community, the people around us, and how we relate to everything that's around us, because no person is an island. I think that's the key. And that's where I'm at now. And that's the athletes and the coaches and parents programs that I work with is about bringing, I call it mastery development, but it's kind of a sneaky way of trying to bring this trauma informed care and
Mhm.
whole person approach to sports. And every time we do, it's kind of like, I kind of say, trying to dismantle the old guard of sports is like scraping an iceberg with a tablespoon.
Mhm.
But I think what we're doing and what you're doing, like just even creating this space and telling stories and sharing ideas, it's about building a new iceberg. And we're building this new community that is ever expanding and ever growing because people are coming with their stories and sharing this love, care, and compassion. And I think it's really cool. I think it's really, really cool.
Thank you for sharing your story on how you got there. And oftentimes, as a social worker, it is usually like we go through, ebbs and flows, and like, okay, now we're here, and we know we want to be in a particular space, but now, like, okay, now we have it. And I can only imagine, like, the '80s and gymnastics had to be an interesting time frame because there were so many powerhouses that came through. We think about those Olympics in the '80s, it's like everybody wants to be part of it. So how I can only imagine what you dealt with during that time frame because you were right there, part of that story where gymnastics was it. It was a thing. And then I also enjoyed what you talked about where there is power within the voice because especially with the collective voice, athletes go through so much and they don't really share what they've gone through until somebody else is like, oh, they start telling their story. And then they're like, oh, well, me too. I had something similar. And there's so much power. Hopefully, our athletes understand that if they use their voice, if they talk, and I know as a social worker, we know how difficult it is to talk to somebody with I don't have a relationship with. But however, there's power that comes from like, okay, I'm speaking now, so somebody can hear me, and then before I know it, 5 other people are hearing me, and then we start a whole collective together. You mentioned how to me, I felt like you're a big community person, and that is how the athletic community clinicians came about. And so, can you talk about a little bit more like where that stemmed from and where is it now?
Sure, it's still very new. It's only within its first year. To be honest, I was just looking for people who work with athletes and sort of see sports in the way that I see sports. I was kind of looking for my people. So I cast a net. Here in New York City, we have a really lovely, huge group of, it's like a clinician listserv, so to speak. And I
Mm-hmm.
just threw that out there like, hey, inviting people over. If you're interested in working with athletes, if you currently work with athletes, I would love to meet people and just bring us together because it's like I don't want to work in silos anymore. And I had such a great response to it, and about 8 people showed up the first time, and then there was a virtual version. There was about 25 people. It just kind of kept growing, and so now the athlete community clinicians are 50 clinicians in the city, in the tri-state area in general,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to get together. It's mainly networking, specifically networking. But what was really cool is that there's a number of them who are former athletes turned clinicians as well. And in those spaces, sometimes we start kind of sharing, what do we do? Who do we work with? Talk about referrals. We do that stuff as well. But when people share, like, I was a former basketball player, I was a former volleyball player, former swimmer, that the vibe does change in the space. And we can feel, I think that every athlete has this. In Korean, the word is like sejong, which means like this understanding without having to explain yourself. And I think that's also very healing for clinicians as well. So I don't think that you have to consider yourself like an athlete only if you've done some like, you train 6 days a week and you went to nationals and whatever. If you focus on something you're determined and committed to, your sport, your way of being. There's 3-season sporters. There's all kinds of people who are all kinds of athletes. I believe that if you identify one, you are an athlete, period.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know that for those of us who have been in like very high performing sports as younger people and have gone to nationals, you're trying to achieve international status or you're trying to be a professional, there is a sort of culture that you grew up in that athletes understand. We all understand it. Coaches understand it as well. So that's the cool thing about the ACC folks, is that people come from far and wide. I love the people who have no background in athletics that do want to be part and parcel of it and want to help. They do. It's so important to bring people with no background of athletics in that way, that it's important for us to have different facets available to us and to know that the community doesn't have to be just one thing. I have a dear friend of mine. He's an amazing hiker. He's an athlete in his own way. He would never call himself an athlete, but I think he works so well with athletes because he doesn't actually have that background, but is a powerhouse when it comes to working with ADHD and can take it from just a different point of view. Just that slight different point of view can be so helpful for so many, while other people need to have someone who can really understand the ins and outs of being inside that sport. So lid for every pot. And that's where the ACC comes from.
Okay, and now we'll hop right into our brand new segment, Kobe's Corner 3. She is a basketball goddess at heart, and so she feels like, she is the specialist at the Corner 3. So we're going to give her opportunity to answer her top 3 questions that she asked for Laura for this segment. Take it away, Kobe.
Okay. So for my first question, it's kind of like a 2-in-1 kind of deal. So my first question is like, what is the most common issue you find yourself helping athletes like overcome when it comes to performances, anxiety, burnout? So that's like the first half. And the second half is like, so what do you find yourself like is the best way to overcome these said issues? Like what's the best way?
Kobe, I'm so sorry. You paused, so I didn't actually get the first part. I'm sorry.
Oh wait, no, you're fine. The first part was what is the most common issue you find yourself helping athletes overcome when it comes to performances, anxiety, burnout, etc.
All of the above.
Yes.
Usually they come in and they have like a mental block. I can't do this. I have a fear. I'm afraid to get injured but as you hear their stories, it's always something else. I'm having a block about this actually translates into my parents are still struggling through their separation. Or, I have a parent who is constantly, giving me feedback and I actually don't want it. And it's hard for me to say something about it. So sort of unraveling those things, but how it manifests as I don't have confidence, I need more confidence, I have a block, I can't do this skill. Um, or I don't have the motivation as I did before. What is always really interesting is the sort of the self-blame of the athlete that I've seen a lot of.
Oh,
And I will preface as well as most of my clients, I do see a lot of, all kinds of athletes and coaches and stuff, but for the most part, I do get quite a few women and athletes of color in particular. So the intersections of that which they're going through race and culture, if they're first gen, second gen, third gen, it's really interesting how all these pieces come out in their sport, but not surprising.
And then, like, for the second part, in your opinion, what is the best way to overcome these said issues, even if there is a best way?
That is such a loaded but great question, right? It's so multi-layered, and that's why it's such a beautiful social work question. There's a thing that I do with people. You know those concentric circles? So if you put yourself in the middle of that, it's the smallest circle right in the middle, and that is your inner circle. And if you think about like who is your community outside of that and how you fit inside the greater, the person and environment, I think that in that is probably the greatest thing that we could give to any athlete is to make sure that there's a community around them that supports them, that loves them, whether we're winning, we're losing, we've got the skill, we don't have the skill, our heart's in it, our heart's not in it. And that's the most important part is that I always am like, who's around you that's hearing your story and loves you anyway? Are you feeling that? Are you getting that?
Thank you for that. And then, so my second question is, can you tell me more about your blog, Athlete Eliminated? And like, what is your topics do you often cover?
So Athlete Illuminated it's basically it's written for the athlete community by an athlete. And honestly, it started as like just things that I was curious about that I wish somebody had shared with me when I was younger. It has now morphed into things that have come up in sessions with people, things that I've noticed as I've gone out to do, I have the workshops that I do as well. So even people that have come up and asked me questions or parents that have given me a call and asked for things. So try to just answer those questions or bring up those kinds of themes and write about that for people.
So it's like it's a for athletes by athletes kind of situation.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And so for my final question, as you said more like in your intro, I just wanted to like get more information about it. But what led you to specialize in working with athletes at such a high performance?
To be honest, I work with athletes who are, I guess most of them are pretty high performing. That was by accident, to be honest. I'll work with any. I don't care if your heart's in it and you want to work on it. I'm here for it. It just happens to be that they tend to all be high performing. Yeah, but some of them are like it's like I think my youngest right now is on the verge of being 14 and is an incredible athlete. To a professional athletes as well. And as much as I love working with athletes for sure, but as of recent, like my heart has been in, and it's kind of going back to is the clinician training and working with coaches. Cause coaches, this is our generation. We did not have the space to talk about our thoughts and feelings and what we've gone through when we were athletes. And so we are hoping to bring this trauma-informed care to athletes today. But, coaches themselves, they are not necessarily equipped or been ever given space. So they don't know what to do with it necessarily. And I do get quite a few coaches that are like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or where's that line between coddling versus like being compassionate and trauma informed? They have lots of questions like that. And I said, the fact that you're grappling with that goes to show what a great coach that you are and you mean to be. There's a lot of really great stuff that's happening right now as well.
right. All right. Well, thank you, Kobe, for your Kobe's Corner 3. Gosh, or you just brought up something I thought about when we think about athletes who have kids and they're just like, oh, I'm not gonna force my kid to play. Or if they want to play, that's on them. But then you are not only just an athlete, you are also a psychotherapist as well. And so is it that much harder to say, hey, like, okay, I'm going to be a little more hands off with my child because not only like are they athletes and you've been an athlete, but also, the mental side, the mental health portion of it. And then like, do you find yourself not to want to be, I guess, a helicopter parent in that space, covering two areas that are critical to children and athletes, young athletes? Like, what is that experience like? That blows my mind some.
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm definitely the parent to an athlete that is more of the try to be hands off.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely have had my fair share when he didn't do so great in a game. He's a basketball player. And so, those awkward car rides home, so to speak, where anything I'm going to say is going to be met with like just anger because he's frustrated. I get that. Yeah, it's hard. What's also really interesting is that my sport, where I was from individual sports. I mean, diving and gymnastics is very, very individual sports.
Mm-hmm.
But to now be an athlete or be a parent to an athlete in a team sport is a whole different, oh my God, whole different ballgame. So, I've seen those sort of gymnast parent who's as she is doing her floor routine, the parent is also doing the floor routine. I've totally seen that. But
Mm-hmm.
the screaming parent while the kid is back, dribbling the ball down the court, I mean, that's a whole other thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I want my kid to just know that no matter what he's done or how the game went, I want him to know that he is loved. And I do check in with him about that as well. I've seen him go through tough times with some coaches that have said some kind of mean things where it's like, that doesn't sit right. Just
Mm-hmm.
relax. He's 11. Unlike whatever happened to me, I actually would confront the coaches about those things. I'm just curious. I want to have a conversation. I'm not here to be combative. I just want to have an understanding um, because that kind of language. And so where it's safe, because I'm little, I'm not going to be able to go to the dad who's screaming at his kid he's like 6'5". I'm not going to be able to tell him like, please don't scream at your kid, even though I
Mm-hmm.
want to. Everything inside of me as a parent's like, please don't do that. Like he's just a kid. But I can do what I can with the power that I have to just have a conversation and hope that it's a different experience for even the coach as well. So that was that was a couple of years ago where a coach had made a comment to my kid and it was not nice. It was just not nice. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to have a conversation with him the next day. It was brutal, but I went to my community as well. I remember calling Joy and saying like, this doesn't sit well. Am I crazy? It was nice to bounce that idea off with her, come up with an idea of how to address this with the coach. I'm not there to tell a coach what to do. I'm not the coach. I'm not going to coach. I leave that to the coach. Please coach my kid.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to say something that's not nice and very untoward and actually quite mean, that's going to impact my kid's self-esteem, we're going to have a conversation for sure.
I would have to have a conversation with you in a couple of years from now because I could feel that whenever my kids are, well, future kids have play sports, and I'm going to have a duality issue too. It's like, okay, I love the game, want to support my kid, but then also like, okay, you're not going to talk, you're not going to talk crazy to my kid. Let's just say you're not going to talk to a manner where my kid's not going to be able to perform. So how do I not be a social worker and a parent at the same time? So you have like 3 hats you're wearing in that space, and I applaud
Yeah.
you for doing so. I know it's not an easy task. It can't be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why a community is really important. Because not just
Mm-hmm.
me, like we were on a really great basketball team last year, and it was just so nice to be able to talk with people who it resonated with them too, and to have that
Mm-hmm.
camaraderie. And so with like that united front, we can be these supportive guardians and parents to the team and to the coach and to the coaching staff. It takes a village to care for these athletes, and that's why it's a team. So there's many times that the
Yeah.
therapist cap has flown out the window for sure. And I
Mm-hmm.
am definitely a mom, definitely a mom.
Laura, I love what you stand for from the community standpoint for sure, because I also believe how important. Now, Kobe probably here tired of me saying this, and anybody who listens to the show, I mentioned a lot how important the ecosystem is for the
Right.
athlete. And so I don't care what else you can tell the kid everything under the sun. We can give them all the tactics, all the skills on how to perform, but that ecosystem around them is not helping them and cultivating at all, then you're just putting always putting old wine into a new wine sack. And so that's not very helpful. Like we
Yeah.
really have to have an environment or ecosystem that's very supportive. And then most importantly, you have to know what that is. Now I like what you said about that earlier. It's like who's around you,
Yeah.
and check who they are before you determine like what's your next step and if you can grow in this area, because that really makes a big difference about. We've seen all the stories. We've seen the 30 for 30s on ESPN, the going
Yeah.
for brokes and everything. And we always notice is that the people around the athlete is really what makes a difference in regards to how successful they'll be or if they'll be their downfall. Who knows? But that
Yeah.
environment and ecosystem is very important. So thank you for sharing that. I just always love when people talk about community and how important it is to development. And so Of course, the show we talk about, and then we win. We talk about everything. Before I feel like a coach and athlete consider winning, we have to take care of certain things first. And so, Laura, if you could share with us, like, what do you think is very important before we even think about addressing the topic of winning for our athletes?
Oh, that is such a good question. The first thing that comes to my mind is that it has to come from the athlete.
Mm,
Has to come from the athlete. There are times, listen, there are times that we woke up and you don't want to go to practice. It's 6 o'clock
hmm
in the morning, third, fourth, 6 o'clock in the morning practice again. You don't want to go. I get it. There are times, but it still has to come from the athlete. This actually reminds me of one of my clients not too long ago was sharing that they're getting some praise from other people. And as you can hear the story of what's happening, you're hearing about other people's expectations of this athlete. I should be doing this because they're doing this. They're doing this nice thing for me, so I should be doing this. Or they're putting their belief in me, so I should be X, Y, and Z. I just said, like, how come we're shitting all over ourselves?
hmm
Whose is this? Just because people think highly of you or you're in a space right now doesn't mean you have to, it doesn't mean anything. What do you want to do? What does it mean to you? And let everything else become a support around that. Because we know that this is a very special space. There's nothing like sports. Sports is really like another family member. It's
hmm
like right? It's not just I'm a diver. It's like I live and breathe diving for a large portion of the day. Sometimes athletes spend way more time with their teams and their coaches than they do with their own families. So my first response is that it has to come from the athlete and that everything else has to support that in many ways. And that means sacrifice. I
hmm
try to tell people, if you're really going to go for it, listen, it's going to be sacrifice. Your family vacations are going to be at someone else's competition. Talk to those siblings, talk to your other kids, make room and space, but ultimately it is going to be a buy-in of an entire community for this athlete, their talent, and their sport. And in that way, that's what makes all of this a very special, a very unique world that we can all tap into and have, like, it can be a really beautiful community if we do it right.
Oh, yes. The importance of intrinsic value and extrinsic value. Intrinsic will always outweigh the most. And so I'm glad you shared that because I don't think a lot of people really understand that. They think of all the glory, the fame, and the things that come from it. But if you don't have what's on the inside that keeps you going, then you're not going to get out of bed, like you said. I
Yeah,
mean, you mentioned earlier
totally.
46 hours, and that's not even including school. Those are long weeks for anybody that wants to be involved in love of sport. And so thank you for sharing that because it's not said enough. And so we thank you for everything that you shared this evening. Could you tell us about when we can expect the next season for Nasty to drop? I know it's coming up pretty soon.
It is coming out on Wednesday, actually, season 4. Our first guest is going to be Andrew Rohrbach. He is a former professional baseball player, also turned clinician. One of those amazing stories. And just, I really enjoy, especially speaking with the men athletes out there in the world, because I know men's mental health is so, so important. And especially in the world of sports that is kind of really, really trained men to not cry, not be, not do, not all the nots. And for women, there not be enough. So, it's really cool. I really thank you, both of you, Kobe and Justin, for creating these spaces where we share our stories, because I think it's a little bit like the village around the fire. And that when we sit here and we share stories and we realize like how human we are, it gives us just like the power and the grace to be a community that we've all been waiting for.
You're welcome. Thank you. So we'll definitely be promoting Tenacity. I'm going to listen to the first episode when it drops. It's very therapeutic listening to you and your cousin. And so looking forward to that episode and we'll promote it, of course, on our social media. And gosh, thank you so much, Laura. And so I'm a fan. You got a new fan out of me. And so and
Same.
please let us know if there's anything else we can do to support you and your work. And so thank you for joining us on And Then We Win.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for tuning in to And Then We Win. My name is Dr. Justin Singleton, and I'm a sports social worker. I love what I do. And if you're interested in learning how I can best support your athlete, your parent group, or even the team, please feel free to reach out to me at info@justsinglevision.com. That is info@justsinglevision.com. feel free to contact me for a free 30-minute consultation so we can figure out how we can best support the mind, vision, and action of your athletes. Thank you and take care.